Greetings and welcome to Edgy Ideas, the podcast that explores what it means to live the good life and create the good society in our disruptive age. My name is Simon Western, and I will be talking to invited guests about diverse topics, exploring social conscious and unconscious dynamics and desires. Welcome to this edition of Edgy Ideas podcast. Today our very special guest is David Rothauser. David is a psychoanalyst, an organisational consultant, an executive coach, educator and supervisor. David has a private practice in psychoanalysis. He trains groups and he engages senior leaders and their teams in reflective practice. David has coached and consulted in a range of industries across all sectors. He's trained in coaching supervision at Oxford Brookes University and in executive coaching at Columbia University. He's trained in psychodynamic group leadership at the Centre for Group Studies, and his psychoanalytic training was at the Centre for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies, where he is now on the faculty. David lives outside of Philadelphia. David, you're very welcome to Edgy Ideas. How are you today?
I'm good, Simon. Thanks for having me on your podcast. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so we had a 5-minute preliminary talk and we were trying to discuss what should we talk about. We initially thought about analytic network listening, what it means to listen from an analytic perspective, because you've done some work on that. You've given us a webinar. But then we meandered and we thought we'd just see where it goes. So where should we take this, David? Where do you want to begin?
That's the question, because what do we want to talk about? You and I always have a good time talking. So I'm happy to talk about analytic listening with you. I taught a course on the topic last semester, and it's really stayed with me. I'll say this, I say this with some hesitation because it's like, in some way it feels like a vulnerable place creatively. But I'm doing a doctorate right now at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis. And I'm in that place in my creative process where I haven't yet selected my research topic. And I'm hesitant to talk about it because it's just incubating. But analytic listening and listening has really emerged as an interest for me. And that's part of why I taught a course on it and we've been talking about it. It's on my mind, not just in psychoanalysis, but in our consulting work, in my coaching work, and my supervising work.
Yeah, and when you raised it a few months ago, it really, you raised a few different themes, and this is the one I picked up on, because we live in a world where listening is very problematic, and in many coach training, leadership training programs, they think about communication. And they kind of talk about listening as a taken for granted assumption. And they focus very much on kind of how Simon can deliver, how you can do your TED talk, But analytic listening is something quite different. So tell us something about that, David.
I'm thinking, what can I say? I can tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
I just sat with somebody who was telling me about their life without much detail. It amounted to, I like this, I don't like that, this is what's going on. My client left me quite ignorant about him. And so I encouraged him to talk in excruciating detail, that if he wanted me to understand him, he wanted that, he would have to take me along for the ride, take me there. Whatever it is he wants me to know about him, he's got to help me with that. That's his job. So he did a good job. He talked in excruciating detail for him about something in his life. And he said, so that's it. He kind of ended his narrative with, so that's the story. And he fell silent. He didn't ask anything of me directly. And so I waited a bit and I said, eventually, when you say, so that's it, and you go silent, is there something you want from me? I couldn't tell. And it was a nice moment because in a way, I think I did learn a lot more about him. And I'm paying close attention to the way he's making use of me. He doesn't ask much of me, and that's notable. So it's either that he doesn't know what he wants, can't ask for it, won't ask for it. There's something going on about the way we're working together that I'm listening to. closely. So I was nervous actually I woke up this morning today. I was somewhat anxious about a podcast I'm going to have to somehow be expert. But then I remembered I had a session beforehand, and that's going to fill me up with all sorts of little puzzles that I'll be working on as I come into this conversation today. So,
yeah. I mean, when I did counseling training,
yeah.
person-centered counseling training was my first entry into this world.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about active listening, which I never really got. They wanted you to sit in a certain way. You had to kind of lean forward a little bit towards the client and kind of posture. And it seemed to me like something was being missed. And I think I learned more from being a Quaker, where in Quakerism you go into a silent meeting and your task is to listen to the inner light, listen to the inner voice, listen to something inside yourself, but also listen collectively to the group as a whole, like what the collective spirit is being asked of in this meeting. And that I think was very different, because it's not kind of an auditory listening. It's a different kind of way in.
Yeah. I'm associating to my experiences by what I'm not a Quaker, and I haven't been to a Quaker meeting, but I've heard a lot about them. So I guess in my imagination right now, I have my own experiences of sitting in a quiet circle where people speak when the spirit moves them. Those are very different kinds of spaces than we're used to. I'm interested in, well, how do you know when to speak in a Quaker meeting?
You'll laugh, but it's when you quake.
When you quake?
Yeah, they're called Quakers because when the spirit moves you to speak, you feel a trembling and a shaking. And when I became a Quaker, or when I entered Quaker meetings, being very much an agnostic, even an atheist, I kind of went on some kind of exploratory journey. And I like their ethics. I like their social justice ethics. And I sat in their meetings, and then one day I found myself quaking. I found myself trembling, and I thought, I'm not worthy to speak. But the trembling wouldn't go away. So I found myself standing up, and a voice speaking through me. And I spoke to the meeting, not a planned speech. It just I had a kind of theme, a topic in me which was burning away, and until I shook and I trembled, and I stood and I spoke. And I think psychoanalysis group work is very linked to that. Actually, Rickman was a Quaker, Beyond's fellow, and I think he brought that into the Beyond group work, because it's a similar process where you listen to the unconscious. If you substitute the word unconscious to spirit, there's a similar kind of process goes on, I think.
Had you ever had an experience of quaking before a Quaker meeting? That kind of trembling outside of in your adult life that you know of?
Yeah. When I've been hesitant to do something, but internally moved to do something. When I've been frightened to speak truth to power in a situation, for example.
Yes, I can have that feeling actually as a participant in a listserv, a professional organization I'm part of. That's usually when I'll say something. I have to say something. I've been quiet for too long, and I have something to contribute. But I don't like doing that on a listserv, because I can be left holding something that can disturb me.
Yeah. Now, listservs could be incredibly painful and persecutory places.
Terrible. One of the things I've been interested in is how we do like you and I are thousands of miles apart, but how we can feel each other. We can love each other. We could hate each other at a distance, at such distance. And it really begs a question in my mind about psyche and soul and spirit at a distance. How do we do this from so far away? And, we have this technology now to be able to interact somewhat simultaneously. But was it as active when people were just writing letters to one another? When Freud and Fliess were writing letters, were they engaged in this emotional connection were there really two minds linked up through letter? When, Ferenczi and Severn were writing to one another across oceans, and she finally moved to be with him in Europe, whichever time that was. or he moved to be near her. How do we do this at a distance? What does that say about listening to one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting that the Quakers were founded in the 1650s, and letter writing was hugely, hugely important. The networks, they had international networks. They went to the States. They were persecuted, and they went to the States and set up Pennsylvania, William Penn, Pennsylvania. And letter writing was at the heart of it. And letters, you read some of these letters, and filled with love, filled with the emotions are tangible there. Yeah, you can feel it. And I think in the psychoanalytic world as well, and I think in many other worlds. So there's some way, yeah, human beings, how they convey deep feelings and how they create listening spaces and communication spaces in different ways is very interesting.
Yes.
I think with letter writing, you have to listen like you read when you read something. I'm a big fan of reading to a group. I like to read to a group, something prepared, something written, and it's a very different experience to speaking to a group.
That was interesting. I read part of what I did during the webinar with the group you invited me to speak to involved reading. And I found that to be challenging, actually, at some point. Which is different than reading a children's story to my kids. Or maybe I can get disconnected when reading a paper from the group, or disconnected from myself, too in my head. But you don't have that experience. Is that part of the, is there an art to reading and listening together?
I think there is. I mean, what I've learned is you have to trust yourself. I went to an ISBSO conference, and they were all into PowerPoint decks and this, and I said I'm going to read a paper, and they were really against it, saying like, no, you have to, this is old fashioned, and people want visuals, and I'm like, yeah, but that's very distracting. These words are carefully put together. I take a lot of time when I write, and I want to really put some words together in a certain way. And when I'm reading, I practice on the journey going there, and I read. And then you have to trust yourself, because you kind of get lost in your own reading, and you don't know if anyone's with you. So it's like you're reading into a void, and I think then you really have to sort of breathe, look around and trust yourself, but carry on. And I found it like very, very powerful.
What do you think people listening to this podcast are hearing right now?
I think different people will hear different things. I think it'll be very diverse response.
Yeah. I wonder what people are wanting to hear when they come to hear the two of us talking to one another.
Who knows? Because the audience is a mystery.
Right, which conjures our own projections.
I mean, again, I think doing a podcast is similar to, you speak into a void, really. I might get 2 or 3 responses like, thank you for that great podcast with David, or I really enjoyed the piece on when you talked about this. But generally, I don't know who's out there. I don't know who's in the void, who makes up the numbers listening.
But I think the fantasy audience, we know there's going to be an audience, or we're fairly certain that someone will listen to this. And I think that affects our interaction. It's different. It feels different than just talking to us where it's in private. There's some layer that I can experience with you, a third, an unknown. I wonder if you've gotten more comfortable with that than I have, given that you do this a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess I trust it. I know that people are there, and I know that the response is usually people are interested. But I was thinking about the third. I think the third's interesting because when I started coaching, something strange happened. I'd moved from psychotherapy, one-to-one psychotherapy work or family therapy work, but into one-to-one coaching work. And my fantasy was that I had to speak a business language, because I was suddenly working in the corporate arena. I'd moved from a therapeutic arena with people who came to me because they had some serious issues they wanted to discuss about their lives. And then I went to coaching, and it was a big jump. I'd never experienced any corporate life or business world life. I'd been in the public sector. And I initially thought I had to kind of perform Simon business coach. and I try and speak a bit more businessy, and I kind of ask about strategies. And but very, very soon I learned that actually this human being next to me wanted to confess, that this was a confessional space, as Foucault said, that people really, there's something very intimate about not having a third there. That this pairing, this bionic pairing, this pairing of hope creates something. And part of that is a confessional where people feel that they're able to confess how they're feeling, challenges in their lives, disappointments,
Yes.
in a way they can't when there's a third.
That makes me think of I often get questions from either therapists or coaches about my ideas about the difference, and coaching clients and supervisees, how we hold in mind the differences between coaching and therapy. And in my mind, the biggest difference is when it's corporate pay coaching, there's more of the organization in the room. There are other eyes on the setting. Even though there's confidentiality, there are limits to confidentiality. There are other people's agendas. There's someone else's idea about what should be happening in the room. And we always have to deal with that when there's a third-party payer. So I really distinguish mostly between corporate third-party pay work and private pay work. And I think part of why I do that in that way is because when I'm coaching, I work very much in a similar way to the way the frame is different, but insofar as the client has a different agenda for themselves, and when they're in therapy versus when they're in coaching, I try to create an environment where people can say anything and everything. Whatever we call it. But I think, it's the third-party payer has, I think, the biggest impact on that from the outside.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. For me, I think the third party in the executive coaching frame is work itself, is work.
It's
Quite often,
the role in the system.
just work. I wouldn't even.
Okay. What do you mean by work?
Well, for me, like, work is an anchor point, and what I mean by it is very diverse. The other person usually defines what it is, but it's there. It's like, we're doing this because of work.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, quite often I think I transcend the third party payment and the confidentiality issues. I'm surprised how quickly trust builds up, how people confess, how they open up
Sure.
in, you create a kind of you go in with analytic listening, and you get kind of, you get the response you and I both are very comfortable with and aware of,
Yeah.
But the difference is this kind of third work, and in a sense, it's an anchor point because it saves you going down like the psychoanalytic route, all the way into a clinical kind of experience.
Right. So, with coaching, the frame is work. People come for a professional coaching. They come for some kind of work enhancement.
And they return to,
right.
I think, like, work can be like a safety valve for them. So if they go too far into their emotional state and they feel a bit uncomfortable, they return to work quite quickly.
Begs the question: how is this related to the project at hand? What does this have to do with what you came for? I assume something. Can you make the link?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Is that the same in supervision? Well, if someone goes too far into talking about themselves and gets anxious in a coaching space, I've talked about my sex life. I've revealed too much of my irrational dream life. And people will know that in addition to being a nice guy, some part of me wants to kill people. Whatever it is, too much. So work provides the safety valve. I think, interestingly, in supervision and coaching supervision, there's, I think, in some way, case material that we're talking about something outside of ourselves provides a similar kind of safety valve. What does this have to do with? What does this have to do with that? Right. So, in the analytic space and a therapy space, do we not have that? Do we not have that?
Well, there's a reality principle. There's always, I guess, a reality principle is a third in a sense. So the world outside the couch, I guess, and whatever that world is for the person on the couch, perhaps is the third in that situation.
I think these are some of the elements of the frame make for the safety that the session's going to be ending. that I know there's going to be another session at some interval that I can predict. It's sort of provide a safety valve. And it's interesting because the frame is with coaches I supervise, people have very different frames from one another, or an idea about the frame even. Do you find that coaches, that we use the idea of the frame in coaching as a tool, as a vehicle, as a container?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when I studied psychoanalytic consultancy at the Tavistock Clinic, I wrote my master's thesis on this because for me, they'd missed out in what they taught me. They'd missed out the frame, so they took for granted the clinical frame. You know, like the framing of a psychoanalytic session, as you say, is a 50-minute hour. It's repeating 3 times a week or once a week, or there's a repetitive nature to it. There's a silence in the room. The phones are off. There's this contracted kind of agreement. There's a very strong frame. And there's a history. There's a history behind this frame, and it's a space you go in with a certain understanding. Whereas in organizational consultancy, you rock up at the workplace and you're trying to apply psychoanalytic concepts without a frame or with a very looser frame. Then my thesis said that that's not enough. That emotional containment doesn't work without this framing, and it doesn't have to be the same frame, but it has to be a frame. You have to have enough of a container, enough, say, frame to hold the work.
Is that where you got the idea, or you invented the idea of the paternal and the maternal containment functions?
Yeah, that's right. Because at Tavistock, they taught the maternal, but they didn't teach the paternal, and I brought the paternal in, drawing on Lacan and stuff. Yeah,
you showed them.
When I handed in my dissertation, I knew I was either going to get a distinction or a failure. They were either they're going to throw me out, or they were going to like it. And it was like that. And they actually taught it. They actually used it for teaching.
That's one.
So
nice. I've actually, that idea has really been helpful to me in my consulting work. Your idea, Otto Kernberg's metaphor, the couch at sea. It really stands out to me when I work in organizations that this act of creating a frame is utterly challenged. A company might have a culture that we cancel meetings last minute. The higher up the executive, the more free people are to treat time or agreements as completely, it could be so chaotic. Having an agreement with a team and a very senior leader about cancellation and payment. The conversation about that can be rub up against the company's culture as something that we don't do here. But it can be so crucial for being able to trust that, for instance, we'll meet.
Yeah.
And we can count on each other to be there. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I started organizational consultancy, I was using a psychoanalytic framework, and it was also a very pathological framework at the Tavistock. And they cancel a meeting sharply on you, and you'd interpret that as an attack on you and on the system. And, and maybe it was, but maybe it was just part of the culture. And the culture is a part of that is a display of power. The higher up you are, the easier it is to cancel a meeting. There's, but the interpretation it was always an attack on you was wrong. I think it was there were other ways of understanding the chaotic functioning.
And I think there are a range of ways of understanding the idea of an attack. In some way, an attack, the idea of that doesn't have to be pathological. So an attack can be protective. It can be crucial for attacking to happen, to create the right distance, to protect oneself. Or if we call it attacking, I don't know if this idea is widespread in coaching. I don't think so. Let me just say this. I know it's not widespread in coaching, but I use the idea of the frame, which has to do with our agreements with one another, as a way to study resistance. It's I'm interested in there's the work of building a frame, making agreements. This is what we do here, getting agreement about that. But then I study deviations from the frame. I expect deviations from the frame because people's relationship to agreements and structure says a lot about in here, about how they are out there with other people in relationship, about their history, how people protect themselves, how people function unilaterally rather than collaboratively. I need a frame in order to do the understanding work that I think is core to what it means to be an analyst and a coach analyst. I don't know how other people. I suspect everybody works with these features of the living human system, but we orient to them differently.
Yeah, and I think there's different cultural ways of understanding the frame as well, which we have to take into account if we work internationally and in different
Sure.
kind of cultures. And there's also, as you know, I study Lacan quite a lot, and I go to a Lacanian analyst, and their frame is different. So they don't have the 50-minute hour. So they have variable sessions. So they cut a session
Yes.
short. And I'm still kind of intrigued by that, about kind of what that does to the work of psychoanalysis.
What does that do for you? That kind of variation on the frame. What's it like to be in that environment?
When I first encountered it, it was a bit of a shock because I'd had psychoanalytic on the couch 50-minute session experience, and I went to the very highly esteemed Jacques-Alain Miller in Paris, probably the best known Lacanian analyst, and married Lacan's daughter and translates all Lacan's work. So I went into his analytic waiting room, and the first shock is the room was full of other people, which was really quite interesting because normally I think the fantasy is that I'm special to my analyst. So, and we try to avoid clients bumping into each other on the stairs. And this was immediately kind of an attack on the ego, which said, like, no, you're one of many.
Right, right.
And you'll wait your turn. And because of variable sessions, you didn't know it was going to be 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. So you waited until he'd thrown someone out of the session, and then it was someone else's turn. So that was interesting. Initially, it kind of undermined my narcissism, and like straight away, that I'm special. And then in the sessions working with Jacques Alain, it was they do Le Cut, and you'd be just getting into your stride, thinking you had something important to say, and he'd say, Le Cut, go. And it was an attack, it felt like an attack, but it was quite brilliant. And the way he timed it, I'd walk out and I'd go and it was in Paris. I'd wander the beautiful gardens in Paris and parks, and I'd be ruminating and thinking and processing and doing so much work. And then I'd go back for a second variable session later in the day, sometimes 3 in a day. So in that sense, I really liked it. When I had a personal tragedy, and I saw Jacques Alain, it wasn't any good. I needed a much firmer containment.
Right. That's interesting.
So it was good for some things, and it was super creative before then. I was really flourishing, and it was really great work I was doing. And then when I had a personal tragedy, I then realized I needed a more contained space, a more stable space, a stronger frame, and a different way of working.
Well, that begs the question about how we modify the way we work for different clients and what they need. Right. It's like, you were invited to operate in some way. It requires you to operate at a more adult level, the cut.
Yeah.
So if earlier needs are on the table, or if earlier developmental work is what's needed, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, in my experience, the Lacanian way is less regressive. It doesn't work, which has some positives, and it's different. That's my own experience. I mean, I know people who've gone through long Lacanian analysis and gone through big regressive kind of pieces of work. But for me, psychoanalysis is one of the few ways of working where you can really allow someone to regress and do some kind of reparation around infantile kind of experiences. Whereas Lacanian work does it differently from me.
I was distracted by your beads for a moment. Are those mala or rosaries?
They're Krishna beads.
Mala. Yeah.
Big fan of the Krishnas.
Me too.
Every time I go to London, Soho, I go to the temple and chant a bit and eat some nice food and say hello to my brothers and sisters in the Krishna community.
I spent a lot of time at the temple in New York, in the East Village. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about you. At least.
Benedictine monasteries, Krishna temples. These are my places.
I haven't found that for myself here yet. I'm outside of Philadelphia. I'm sure something is here. Yes, I'm sure you can see my Ganesh on the shelf.
You can see my sadhu
Yeah,
I met in Nepal. I gave him a gift of some money, and he gave me a gift of an apple. Returned my gift.
that's wonderful. He gave you an apple. So that's interesting. I don't know how much framing we would need to have this conversation, but do we have... So I spent a lot of time in my 20s learning to meditate, building and maintaining a personal practice, but also with a community and something like a teacher, always a guru, a sadhu. And I wonder if we miss something like this in the coaching world or in the business world or in Western culture, that in a way, I think psychoanalysis, as a practicing analyst, I think the analytic community has a lot of these features. And that's part of what draws me in. I think about psychoanalysis really as a folk tradition more than an intellectual tradition. I don't hear about this talked about a lot, but it's really, there's a delicious culture. You're with your teacher, you're with a community of practice. It's very social, and there's practice involved. But I wonder about that. That felt missing to me in the coaching world. That feels missing to me in the coaching world, generally.
Yeah, I agree, and I think coaching is very hyper individualized. I think it misses that sangha. I think it misses a community, and I mean, another interesting thought I just had listening to you, I was in my analytic listening phase, was we've discussed transmission, how psychoanalysis is a practice of transmission, which again links to, like in Lacanian world, they use the word transmission all the time, and it's just similar to the Hindu transmission from guru to disciples. So you don't teach knowledge, you don't kind of learn knowledge through a conscious way. It's a different way of gaining understanding or wisdom or
Right. So there's we're back to Freud's telephone metaphor. They're transmitting unconscious and the receiving unconscious. And so how do we open ourselves up to a transmission? And is there work we do to make... I think when we tell stories, back to our topic about telling a children's story or reading a paper, there must be something we're doing where we're giving a message that is different from the words on the page. We're conveying something when we tell a story.
There's something very powerful about this. I go to I mentioned Benedictine monasteries. If you go to a Benedictine monastery, you pray 5 or 7 times a day. You there's this rhythm of the day. In between, the monks do manual work, and I do my own meditation, walking, whatever I need to do, processing, and meal times are special. So you go into the monks' enclosure, which is the only time you get to go into the monks' enclosure, which is off bounds for guests. But you go in for a meal and you sit down at the meal table with other guests, and then the monks will be there, and there's an opening prayer, and then we eat in silence. So you're served by one of the monks, and you eat in silence, and during that silence, somebody reads, and it's usually not kind of something from the Bible or something religious. You know, normally it's a novel. And it's the most blissful experience. You have no pressure to have sort of mumbo jumbo conversation. You can completely relax, and you're absorbed and you're being read to like a child in bed. It's like, it's awesome.
It's fun. It sounds delightful.
Yeah, it's something, and there's something about kind of listening, and it's not just a word. Like you said, there's a transmission going on. It's very interesting.
There's I don't know who wrote this book. It's a children's book. It's called The Book with No Pictures. Do you know this book? We discovered it recently, and both our 5-year-old and our 2.5-year-old can get into it. It is a book with no pictures, but it has the reader saying things that they'd rather not say. Oh man, I have to read that word, badunky fit. You know, it's like it cuts right into this need for glee and silliness and play and joy that kids at that age naturally have, and that it's hard for, it can be harder for adults to inhabit when we're in the, and that book, that I'm associating to that joyful experience of, it cuts right through, helps us connect in a way without pictures.
Yeah. Well, we have a world with so many images. A book without pictures is bliss.
That's true. Say more about that. I don't know if I understand what you just said.
I just think there's been a massive shift. We can't have a name for it, but it's forgotten about. There's so many images. Like, we're so inundated by the image now that it dominates other sensory kind of experiences.
Oh, yes. Do you keep yourself away from your phone? Do you have a practice around protecting yourself from bombardment? I think we're talking about the analytic instrument now, and how we maintain ourselves in the way that we can then do the kind of listening that we're talking about.
I do okay. I mean, I'm drawn to the phone like many others.
Yeah.
But
Me too.
I've become quite bored with it. I mean, this summer's been good for me. I mean, my radio's on the phone, my message on the phone, my LinkedIn's on the phone. But I've actually become quite bored of it. So I think my use has dropped quite a lot. I've just come back to the cafe actually. It's like I love being read to. I like reading. We have a Soul at Work event next week in Spain. We have 20 people from all over the world coming to think about what it means to bring your soul to work. So I go to the cafe. I was getting a bit stressed out thinking about this. I walk the dog to the cafe and I take some Zen meditation book and I read, and there's something very different experience. The phone goes away. I leave the phone in the office and there's something very, I come back a different kind of human being.
Yes.
So I try and create more spaces like that. Could do better.
Me too.
David, we're coming to our time boundary. This is a frame of the podcast, around 40 minutes. We ask our guests if they have anything to say to the world, the listening world, about what it means to live a good life and to co-create a good society. Any thoughts at all would be welcome.
By way of, I can say something to the audience by way of what's been working for me, which is making sure we have cooking meals for friends, as much of that as can be. That, in my world, makes for a good life, which really, I think, gets at including play in my world. Life can get quite serious.
You can.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much for your sharing that, and I've really enjoyed our conversation as ever. I hope the listeners enjoyed listening, and see you along the journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. That was fun.